So, yeah, I figured this would be a good call just where we can kind of talk about the making of The Oath from start to finish. And that'll kind of cover a lot of the hurdles of filmmaking,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about independent filmmaking.
I want to know about the rats. I want to know if they were professional or not. I don't know why that's what I want to know about. But that's specifically what I want to know about.
Union rats.
They want scabs. No scab rats.
No scab rats.
Scab rats.
Welcome to Certain POVs, another past podcast with Case and Sam. This week is a 5th episode, so we're talking about a movie that overcame adversity. Let's celebrate the creativity of the filmmakers.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another past podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
Sam, how do you feel about independent filmmaking?
I think it's awesome. I think it's cool. And I think really fun stuff comes out of it. Because, when you don't have a large budget, you have to think outside of the box, right? You got to use all the little tools.
100%. Like, I always say that one of the big through lines of the show is how adversity can really mold and create more interesting works. And that oftentimes the movies that we look at are the ones that didn't handle adversity or didn't really receive adversity going into it. And so that is why I like to work on independent films. And maybe I'm being a little self-indulgent today, but I'm bringing on a movie that I was a co-producer on.
Ooh, look at you.
So for us to talk about The Oath, a Batman fan film, we are joined by...
Which I enjoyed.
the writer, director, and jack of all trades on that production, Johnny K.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on.
Johnny, thank you for indulging that lengthy opening before bringing you on.
Fanfare, confetti, woo!
You guys can keep going. I love long intros.
Yeah, so Johnny, so this is a 5th episode. So as people who listen to this podcast know, every 5 episodes we talk about a movie that actually had to go through adversity and came out a better film for it. And like I said, independent filmmaking is rough. I was there not that much of the shoot, but for the amount of it, I saw quite a bit of the issues that you have to go through when making it. And I heard all of the stories from the rainy nights before and things like that. So I know that making The Oath was a labor of love, but it's love that has been rewarded. You're on YouTube. Let me check where we're at now, but you cracked numbers that we could only dream of. So you're at 5.21 thousand subscribers and you're at 19,000 views or 19,000 likes. Pardon me.
One of those was mine. I liked it.
I don't even see your view count here. So this is a widely seen movie now, and it's been very positively received.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. And the last time I looked at it, because I promise I don't obsess over the view count every single day of my life. I promise I don't do that. But the last time I looked at it, I think we were 800,000. I know we're slowly sneaking up on 1 million, which is really, really cool. We will eventually hit 1 million views. And obviously it'll be the most seen project I've ever made. And that's a good feeling. The fact that it's a Batman fan film has a lot to do with why so many people are watching it. Batman helps a lot.
Yeah, that's the wild part about like fan films. Like I've worked on productions that were sci-fi and like, Star Trek-ish versus ones that are actually Star Trek, like Farragut Forward, which we're working on currently. And like just being a fan film, like having the name, it's going to get people to be paying attention to you in a way that they just wouldn't if you were doing it in a situation that you control.
Right. Yeah. And for us, I mean, there was a lot of benefits to doing a fan film, and we can get into that in a minute, but it kind of came with its own built-in audience. When you make a Batman fan film, a lot of Batman fans are going to watch it. And obviously as an indie filmmaker, the hope is that they will see that and then they will say, what else is this, studio putting out? Let me go look at the original stuff. So it helped us all the way around. Definitely got a lot more eyeballs on our studio. And my goal, since we were never going to profit or make $1 from this, obviously, because I don't really want to go to jail.
Right.
That was a big motivator. But my goal with this was really to get a lot of extra eyeballs on our actors, on our cast, and I think it's probably some of their most watched work as well. And I know those guys have told me they've gotten additional work, on other projects because of The Oath. So that was an awesome result of all this too.
That is such a cool element of it all, where like this really feels like a labor of love, but it's one that is a really cool like resume piece for everyone. You know, it's so easy to get people to like tune into it, check it out, and it's, you know, it's 20 minutes long. Like, it's not like a huge investment that people have to make, but then they look at it and they see the quality, and it kind of makes me think of, what was it, the director for District 9 and like Chappie, like doing sort of those kind of like fan projects, or Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, where like that was a proof of concept short that then like exploded that guy's career for a minute, and then it collapsed because the movie was a giant bomb. But
Right.
but for a minute there, it looked like this is the beginning of a new auteur.
Yeah. And then it didn't, but
Yeah.
you know,
But it could have.
It could have been.
It could have been. We should talk about that. But yeah, so why don't we actually like kind of just walk through the production of The Oath? So like, again, full disclosure, like I was a co-producer on it. I invested in the project, so I don't want to be having anyone think that this is just some sort of random thing that I found and I wanted to champion. But it kind of is. It's because the project was well underway by the time I got attached to it. And I just heard about it and I was like, that sounds really cool. And like the shots looked really cool. And I knew some of the people involved. So it was like, oh yeah, I do want to champion that. And so why don't we take it all the way back then? So how did this all get started? And I also know many of the actual answers, but I want to hear Johnny tell it.
Yeah, no, I blame everything on our buddy Guillermo Mejia, also goes by the name William J. He's a cosplayer here in the Washington D.C. area where we are, and he's done a lot of costumes, cosplays over the years. And just one day randomly, I saw a picture of him wearing a Michael Keaton Batman suit, and he's one of my best friends, and not that he needs to run his purchases by me, but like I was a little hurt that he bought a Michael Keaton Batman suit and didn't tell me or consult with me first, I guess.
wow,
And
betrayal.
I know it was shattering for me, but I see this picture and obviously I text him and I said, "Is that suit yours?" He's like, "Yeah, I just got it and I love it. You got to come over because I want to do a photo shoot." I'm all, I think a lot of cinematographers probably got to start with photography, and I'm no exception. I love photography. Came up doing a lot of photography back in the day, and my first thought was definitely not to invest 2 years of my life in making a short film. It was, no, come over to the garage. I'm going to turn all the lights off. We're going to key light you and edge light you in a very specific style so I can pretend like I'm Tim Burton for like 2 hours. That was my goal. And he came over, we got him in the suit. I just started shooting. And, typically you get your shots and then you go edit them and play with them and tweak them. And that day I can just remember looking at the raw photos on the back of the camera, right, on the LCD screen. And I'm just looking at those pictures saying, this looks really, really good, and my personal opinion, obviously The Oath has always tried to channel the Michael Keaton, Tim Burton, Batman 89 aesthetic and vibe. We never wanted anything else. We didn't even want Batman Returns aesthetic or vibe. We only wanted Batman 89. So I learned a few things that day, certain ways to light Batman. Definitely of the opinion that the worst thing you can do is put too much light on Batman. There's something about keeping him dark and in the shadows and letting your brain kind of, work out all the details that your eyes can't see. I think that's also why the cantina scene in Star Wars was so awesome, way back in 77, because you couldn't quite see all the creatures in the shadows. You just got hints that they were there. Same thing with Jabba's palace and in Return of the Jedi. It was scarier because you couldn't really see it all. And your brain just kind of kicks in and you start scaring yourself at that point. So that's how Batman has always been to me in Batman 89. And when William came over for the photo shoot, my brain just started kicking some ideas around. And I showed a photo to William. And he looked at it and he said, "This looks like a poster for a movie, but there's no movie." And I said, "Yeah, let me think on that." And I didn't commit to anything that day. I got a couple hundred shots. He went home. And then over the next couple of weeks, I got it in my mind, if I was going to do a Batman short film, how would I do it? And my thought then went to, well, I'm a huge fan of John Carpenter. I'm a big horror movie fan. And based on just everything I just told you about my opinions of keeping Batman in the shadows, the idea kind of hit me that if I did a Batman short film, it was obvious to me that Batman was not going to be the main character. Batman needed to be a presence lurking in the shadows. And then that begged the question, well, if you're making a Batman movie and Batman's not the main character, who is? And then the idea came up about a cop. What is a Gotham City police officer, a street cop, a sergeant? This is the poor guy that has to live in that world. He has to work in that world. We intentionally set the movie a week before Batman 89. So it's a prequel. And I knew from the first minute that I conceived the script that this was going to start with the death of Johnny Gobbs, which was obviously a reference in the opening scene of Batman 89 about Johnny Gobbs getting ripped and taking a walk off a roof. And I thought, well, I'm not going to show how Johnny Gobbs dies, but we're going to start the movie with a corpse, and that corpse is going to be Johnny Gobbs, and that will establish our movie a week right before Batman 89. And the script came together pretty quick. Again, this is way before crowdfunding, way before anything. This was just an idea, just starting to write a 20-page script. And originally, the character of Sergeant Frank Kelly, who was the cop, he was just purely a corrupt cop. And the movie was basically going to be very linear about a corrupt cop taking a bribe, and then basically Batman just kind of bounces this guy, and then the movie was over. And I thought, well, there's no real emotional climax there. It's just a
Right. Where's the journey, right?
Right. Because I was still hung up on how can I make Batman like Michael Myers from Halloween? You know what I mean? How can I play up the horror aspects of this? The point of the movie was showing Batman as a nefarious, shadowy presence, stalking this guy. And my brain was kind of hung up on that. And then obviously once I spent a few more days on it, I thought, no, Sergeant Kelly can't be this straightforward. What if he's not just a purely corrupt cop? What if he's a cop that's on the edge of being corrupt? And now we're getting a little more into the moral ambiguity here. It's like, okay, how would Michael Keaton's Batman treat a cop character who is not corrupt yet, but is getting ready to be, is on the verge of corruption? Maybe the cop's taking his very first bribe ever that night. And Bruce Wayne, Batman, knows this, and then I got into a lot of awesome conversations with Joe Gransky, who we credited as a story consultant. Joe's also an awesome artist. He did the Gotham City landscape painting at the opening of The Oath. He painted that as well. But he's a story consultant on The Oath, and he and I talked many hours about, well, would Michael Keaton's Batman just write this guy off as a loss? Would he just beat him up? Would he save him? How would he treat this situation? And my idea was always, this is the world's greatest detective, right? If he's facing adversity, speaking of adversity, Case, if Bruce Wayne is facing adversity and he doesn't have any allies in Gotham, because we're a prequel to 89, so he doesn't even have Commissioner Gordon as an ally, he's going to take all the help he can get. And my opinion was, if he can, potentially intervene and help scare this guy straight, now the story can go somewhere. Now we have a moment where an officer has to decide what he's going to do. And it didn't take me too long to get to that point. But originally I just wanted to see Batman kind of like Michael Myers, or the shark in Jaws for that matter. That's how I wanted to see Batman. Jaws is not a movie about a shark. Jaws is a movie about a police chief who's scared of the water. The shark just happens to be there. And that's how I always saw The Oath. And that's kind of a very long answer to how that all kind of came about originally.
Yeah, this brings up a question I have, or rather, it brings up a question I was going to ask, but you kind of addressed, which is I was wondering if you started with a full script idea or if you started with scouting, because that I feel is the next sort of thing, at least in my head, of like, where are you going to film this thing? Or did that happen later?
Oh, much later. I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not nail down a location until 9 or 10 months after the script was written.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say that the artwork in the beginning is gorgeous.
Yeah, that's all Joe Gransky. He's check out. I think his website's joegransky.com. He's an art teacher here in DC. Great portrait artist, oil painter. And when I talked to him about the Gotham City painting, I said, do me a favor. Here's my idea. Don't just rip off the landscape painting that opened up Batman 89, that scenic painting. Don't just rip that off. Give me a view of the same Gotham City skyline, but from about a half mile downriver. So we're looking at the same thing. It's just from a different angle. And then once I thought of that, I'm like, that's actually a perfect parallel for what The Oath is. The Oath is we're looking at the same thing, which is Batman 89, but from a very different angle. So I thought that was a pretty cool parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the matte work in there, like your commitment in general to having a very practical, very authentic to Batman 89 aesthetic is, a really strong point of this all, even though the suit is the Batman Return suit.
Have we heard that before? No, not at all. But that's a really good example of like the costume came first. He had the costume first. That spurred the idea for the script. And then, we kind of went from there, and we definitely didn't have the budget to outfit him in a different suit. But you know what? I'm okay with that, because I guarantee you, Batman Returns was not the first night that Batman wore the Batman Returns suit. He had to test that thing out. That was a
Yeah, of course.
prototype. Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's got to have more than one suit,
Of
and
course,
Yeah.
that all makes sense.
Actually, in one of the movies, he did go to his closet. I mean, I think it was like I think it was the Clooney movie, so maybe it doesn't count. But he does go to his closet, and because I remember the Ronald McDonald commercial had come out where it was like what to wear, and I made that joke when Batman was going through the multiple suits. So he does have multiple suits in film canon.
Yeah.
even
Well,
if
and
it's
also,
like
minor spoiler for The Flash, but Keaton, who is heavily, publicized as being in the movie as Batman, shows up, and he does have a whole wardrobe of bat suits. So there's
Yeah.
like even canon that supports this one, weirdly enough.
yeah, for sure, from
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah. But Johnny, you mentioned not having the budget to get a whole new suit, which no one was expecting you to get a whole new suit. Like, I think if anyone has pointed that out, it has only been as a jokey nitpick on that one. But you mentioned budget, and so I feel like the next question is the fundraising, and what were the early steps of that, and then what is the relation between when you started fundraising versus you actually started filming? Because I know it was still running well past you having already like started to shoot stuff. So like, how did that campaign come about, and like what were the things you did that you feel like worked well in terms of like getting the money you needed to make this thing?
Sure. Yeah. I desperately tried to not crowdfund this. I have a real problem asking people for money. Like there's so many like truly worthy causes in the world to give your money to, and people, who need money because it's tough times, breaking news for a lot of people right now. So like me raising money for a Batman fan film, I just hated the idea of I call it crowd begging. And I didn't like the idea of crowd begging, but I did it. About the time I started looking at the wardrobe expenses. And I'm not talking about the bat suit. The bat suit was basically bought by William off the shelf from an awesome company down in Colombia, South America, called The Cave Creature Workshops. And he bought it off the shelf. So the bat suit was done, boots, cape, everything. What really raised the costuming budget were those cop costumes, the Gotham City police costumes. I think between the two of them, that was around $3,000, just those two costumes. So that's full leather, navy pea coats, the hats. We had the badges custom made for Gotham City. We actually had to sign waivers saying we would destroy those badges because they're real police badges. And we had to sign a waiver that we were going to destroy those badges after production, or they would stay in my custody. And of course, they're still here. I've got them. I'm not getting rid of those. But just all the belt accessories, the prop weapons. I think the boots, like the motorcycle boots the cops were wearing, I mean, those boots are $400 a pair. We quickly got to like $3,000 of costume expenses. And
Wow.
I was hanging in for that. I knew there's a price to doing business, right? So I was hanging in for some of that. Obviously, we were shooting out of town, which we can get to in a minute. But as soon as you shoot out of town, we did cover the casting crews, hotels, food, several meals a day, just all the travel expenses. We even covered gas. So when I started adding all these expenses up, what really broke the camel's back is the permit process working with the city of Petersburg. And I'll touch on scouting real quick, Case. We scouted, we're based here in the Washington, D.C. area. So we actually have access to a lot of really cool urban areas. And we started looking in Philly. We started looking in Baltimore, D.C. I looked in Virginia and the cities here like Alexandria, Harrisonburg, Charlottesville, some of the smaller cities out in the 81 corridor. And what really kind of swayed us toward shooting in Petersburg, Virginia, just south of Richmond, where we ended up, is we actually had our base camp space donated to us by a local business owner. So that was awesome because it was obviously all going to be night shoots. And we shot during November in pretty frigid, cold conditions. So having a warm base camp that our cast and crew could retreat to was key. So we had that space donated to us. That's what kind of clicked Petersburg for us. But we didn't want to shoot this guerrilla style and go out and just steal a bunch of shots. We went through the full permitting process with the city, going through their tourism board. There were costs to that. There were costs to shooting or shutting down some of the roads and alleys that we were looking at shutting down. All these things cost money. Even if you're an indie filmmaker, you could be AMC shooting Walking Dead, or you can be me shooting an indie film in the city of Petersburg. They're going to work with you as they can, but it's going to cost you money. And kind of what broke the camel's back is they said, well, Petersburg can be a little rough around the edges, crime wise, et cetera. And it's one of the reasons that I wanted to shoot there, because it had that kind of gritty urban feel, and
Mhm.
the city was asking me, hey, do you want police presence on your set? And in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, that's going to be overtime for a couple police officers.
Yeah.
And once we kind of got to that point, and we, by the way, did not end up taking them up on that. We had our own security provided within our own crew, but that was really the last expense where I thought, you know what, I'm going to need a little help here, and I'm no longer too proud to take it. I said, let me just do an Indiegogo crowdfunder. If I raise $500, that's awesome. That's a couple people's hotel rooms. If I raise $1,000, that's great. That's going to feed our crew. And we ended up raising about 8 grand, I think, around $8,000. And believe it or not, this is a great problem to have as an indie film. We were in danger of raising too much money, because that was going to cover all our production costs, all our costuming, all our permits, all that. And of course, obviously, like I said before, I don't really want to go to jail. So the last thing I wanted to do is ever come close to making a profit on Batman. So I
Right.
actually ended up shutting down the Indiegogo after we hit our goal and we got what we needed. We made our funding quick, and it helped offset all those production costs that really, really stacked up.
I would say I can only imagine, but no, I actually can very much articulate a lot of those because we've been involved in so many of these together at this point. And like I said, I was part of that. It's interesting that the location being donated sort of like set that, because like I remember that location was really good for where we were filming. Like it was like all very like short walking distance. Could you go a little bit more into like into the donation part of it? Like how did that conversation even start?
Oh, the donation of the space
Yeah.
as base camp. Yeah, it was actually a guy who was a mutual friend with Jerry Morgan, who was our lead actor in the film that played Sergeant Kelly. Jerry lives down in that direction somewhere, and knew Bobby Lynch was his name. Knew Bobby, and just had the conversation and connected Bobby and I together. And Bobby is also an independent filmmaker and has his own stuff, and so he knows the pitfalls of filmmaking. And when he and I had a phone conversation, I just mentioned that the perfect place would be somewhere near all these awesome alleys, dense urban areas that aren't crowded, because we didn't want any bystanders and tourists walking through our set, which happened anyway. That's okay. But we wanted a just kind of a urban area near a space that had bathrooms, and near a place we could put up folding tables and feed our crew, and just kind of have that without building like a tent city, out in the alleyway and trying to do all this exterior. And again, I mentioned, it was a freezing cold few nights that we shot down there. Got into the 20s, I think, one night. And so
Oof.
it was really, really important to have an indoor area. So that donation case, it really just came from me having another conversation with another filmmaker, and he understood exactly what we needed. And he was just a kind enough gentleman to say, you know what, I will, gladly let you guys use my space. And he had a business space, right there in the thick of where we needed to be. And we actually could then design our locations, because we shot in probably 5 or 6 different locations in that neighborhood. And we could then kind of plan out our shot list and stuff based around that. We could run, some generators out of there, run long extension cords if we needed. And again, like I said before, you can't put a price on having a warm place for people to come into at 1 o'clock in the morning when it's 25 degrees outside.
For sure.
Yeah. What was it like when you actually saw the space that was being donated and the alleys around it? Because like again, it was like perfectly located. Like I think the last couple shots were like literally were like right outside the back door to the base camp.
I guess to your point about the order of script versus locations, script came 8, 9 months before. The script just kind of said, we're going to shoot this in an alley. The fight's going to be in an alley. We didn't really have a lot more specifics in the script, but when we actually saw the locations and saw what was right within a 3 or 4 block radius of our base camp, now I could really visualize, okay, this opening scene is going to be in this alley. The fight scene is going to be in this alley because it's a little more private and it's much closer to our base camp. And we could even look at the weather, the early forecasts, and try to determine, okay, if it's going to rain on us one night, where do I need to be, to kind of avoid the worst of the rain and be close enough to get people indoors really quick. So actually being able to scout the location, it did kind of give us a much better idea of where we'd be shooting some of those scenes.
Cool. So you have your location. You at this point are just starting to fundraise, if I get the timeline right, because that was still going into when you were actually shooting. So you're getting ready for the shoot, what was the key thing you needed to make sure you had equipment, crew wise, like what were the bullet points like in terms of priority? Like how did you work your way backwards from, most important to least important?
Right. And when did casting fall into it? So I have an important question about some of the actors.
Yeah, just the people in general. Like what was the order for some of the big ticket ones there?
Oh yeah, definitely. Casting was very early on, and I'm super proud of the cast. And I always say this when I do interviews about The Oath. Every actor in The Oath was my first pick for that role. Like there was never a second pick. Like if Jerry Morgan, if he didn't want the job of Sergeant Frank Kelly, I have no idea who number 2 would be. I don't know. Same thing with Oz, Keenum, Chris Conkey, Stumbo. Guillermo's a little different. He came with the bat suit. We couldn't make the movie without him. I love him. He's a good friend, but we couldn't do it without him. But all those guys, they were my first pick for casting. And I'd known each of those guys. We'd all worked together on previous shows. I worked on camera for a little while in my life. All those guys are obviously real actors, and they work on camera a lot. And I met them on a couple different shows, filming in the Richmond area, probably a year or two before we shot The Oath. And when I was writing the role of Sergeant Kelly, I always had Jerry Morgan in mind. And I started with him, called him up, and I said, "Hey, do you want to work for free on a fan film that nobody's ever going to make money from?" And he said, "Sign me up. Let's do it." We talked about it, and Jerry was just, he was perfect for that role. Jerry's, he's a Marine. He's lived a life. He's had a lot of experiences in life that a lot of people haven't, I think.
And he's friggin' huge.
Right, Jerry's bigger than me. I'm about 6'3", and Jerry's standing over top of me.
Okay, I just need to point this out because once I found this factoid out, it's just been I know a lot of tall people who are big strapping folk. Alan Ritchson, who plays Reacher on Amazon's Reacher, is only 6'2", and that they shoot him to look 6'4". And I realized I've got friends who are that size or bigger. So just Johnny, just so you're aware, you're bigger than Reacher, the guy who's everyone is oh, the show about the big man show.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, so Jerry's bigger than that.
Jerry's bigger than me. Yeah, Jerry's bigger than me. And as William will tell you, and I go back and forth calling him William or Guillermo, who played Batman, as he will tell you, he's the exact height as Michael Keaton. So he doesn't want to hear anything. When he's standing up next to 6'4" Jerry, who's probably closer to 6'5" because he's wearing motorcycle boots, William would be the first to tell you, "Hey, I'm the same height as Michael Keaton. You cast a 6'5" giant to stand beside me." Yeah, casting was that came very early. Then I went right down the list, talked to Oz Keenum, who played our mobster Jimmy Atlas, and Chris Conkey. Talked to Stumbo. Mike Stumbo came back. He and I worked together on my first short film called The Killer of Grassy Ridge, which went across the world and won a ton of awards that I didn't know debut short films could win. And I brought Mike Stumbo back in. I called it a cameo. He played a homeless guy in the alley. We shot him out in one night, and he made a little cameo in that. But yeah, the casting was the biggest thing. Before I keep going, Sam, you said you had a question about the cast. You want to?
Yeah, I specifically have a question about the rats and whether they were actors or you just found them. Listen, everyone was fantastic, and I am not trying to be disrespectful to these very talented actors, but I do want to know about the rats. Was this footage you found? Were these trained rats? Were you just oh, look, there's rats. Let me focus on them running around. What was with the rats?
The rats were our only union actors on set. They got paid a stipend. No, the rats weren't union. So the rats came to me during the editing process. So after we'd already shot everything out in the streets, and you got to keep in mind, Sam, when you're shooting in the streets at 2:00 in the morning with a group of actors that have flown in from Georgia and, different places, the priority shots have to be those guys. It's not the inserts. It's not the, oh, here's a cool stairway, or here's a cool, industrial pipe or something like that stuff. You can get that later. Right. So I didn't shoot a ton of inserts while we were there. I was focusing on our actors, obviously. And then as I was editing the movie together, we got this montage scene where as Sergeant Kelly's walking through the back alleys of Petersburg, and I just needed some extra spice there, right? I had the salt and pepper, but I needed the chipotle and the cumin. And when I was editing, I thought I gotta put some stuff in here. And full disclosure, that shot that you're talking about of those rats, that is the only frames of this movie that I did not shoot myself. I found that footage. I loved it. I put it in as a test to see if it would work. In my opinion, it did. We're only talking about 2 seconds.
Did. Like, honestly, like the lighting's pretty good. Like it matches up pretty well. You don't really get like thrown out of the alley seeing it.
Oh
So
yeah. Well, I definitely color graded it to match the rest of the movie. So I didn't just
right.
throw it in, but I found that footage. I licensed it. Definitely had the rights to use it. I think it should be credited probably in the credits. And yeah, I basically got it as an asset, threw it in, and I color graded it to match the rest of our shot. But yeah, those rats you're talking about, that's the only footage in the entire film I didn't shoot myself.
Not casted by you either.
No, and the rats haven't. I don't know if the rats have seen the movie. If they have, they've not sent me like a cease and desist for using their likeness or anything. But
Listen, I'm sure they're a fan. I mean, it's Batman. They're probably happy to be in a Batman film.
probably, yeah. Who wouldn't want that?
Now, for the other side of the camera, in terms of crew, who did you get first? Who were your priorities in terms of things? Like, what is the process when you are like, all right, well, I'm making a Batman movie and I got a guy who looks like Batman. Make this movie. Because you do a lot of work on it, but you're not the only person.
Oh, for sure. No, by no means. Logistics. It all comes down to logistics. You shoot a movie the same way you move an army, right? You have to you have to make sure there's a comfy place for them. You got to feed them. You got to make sure the bathrooms are there. You got to make sure there's water. You got to make sure there's coffee. Please let there be coffee. So really the first stop there was, as Case through other projects, is you got to have a rock solid production manager, a base camp manager who can organize all the logistics and get a lot of that done. I roped in Heather, real quick. She's my better half. And I talked her into being on camera in The Killer at Grassy Ridge, which she had no desire at all to ever be on camera. And when we started shooting The Oath, I asked her, I said, hey, can you help me handle the logistics of base camp to feed all these people and make sure we keep everybody safe? So she was on very early on, and she signed up to help that. She also did it on a broken foot.
Yeah, I was about to bring
by
that
the way.
part
up. So if you remember, she had broken her foot, I think, at a wedding like a month before we shot. So she was not only managing base camp, but she was riding around on a little scooter, which did not make her job easier. She was very early on. Alan Sloniker, who is a local guy, local friend of mine, he was a part of it as a grip. Ramel Punzal, who ended up being the first assistant director. And now that was my first time working directly with Ramel as my first AD. And now I can't even put my shoes on without Ramel on other projects. So The Oath was the first time that he and I worked together that closely. And it was awesome. And like I said, now I can't imagine doing anything without Ramel now.
A meeting of minds that I am so happy about because the two of you are such an incredible team. I just adore seeing that the two of you work together. So like the fact that like The Oath is where it started, I find fascinating.
Yeah, well, he and I make a good team because I've usually got nothing but problems, and Ramel is a problem solver by nature, right? So I keep him well fed with a bunch of problems, and he likes figuring it out. But yeah, The Oath was the first time he and I worked together. He was a very late addition to that crew. I think he didn't come on until maybe just a month or two before. And again, I didn't know, that we would end up having the great working relationship that we did. I brought him on originally just to help with a lot of the lighting and the generators and running cords and light placements, basically just to be a right-hand man, for me on set. One of the downsides to indie film is there never quite seems to be enough people. You always need somebody else, and everybody's wearing 10 hats already. I'd shot, 2 films by that point, 2 shorts. So I knew going into The Oath that it was unrealistic that I would be able to do a lot of that work by myself. So I had to bring in Ramel again as first AD. And now, he's also my first AD on Farragut Forward, our Star Trek fan film we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally couldn't tie my shoes without Ramel.
So. Yeah, Ramel is amazing. Everyone out there, just understand, we're talking about just one of the most delightful people. I have been his dungeon master. I have been his production manager. He is just fantastic. And I just can't stop singing the praises of Ramel Punzal. Awesome guy. And if you're ever working with him, just know you're working with a goddamn pro. Now,
absolutely.
Was he referred by John Broughton?
He was. Yeah. Actually, I met Ramel way back when on a Farragut shoot. I think I was around for a Farragut shoot. This is 2014 or 15. And I'm talking about the Starship Farragut fan film series. I was around for a shoot one day, and I actually met Ramel on set way back when, and probably saw him at a couple local, conventions and stuff like that. But I'd never worked with him until The Oath. And like I said, he and I developed a real quick shorthand with each other. We can kind of read each other's minds, and he's really good at reading my mind, which is, if you were to draw up the relationship between a director and a first AD, like, you can't ask for anything more than that. If he's always a step or two ahead of me and knows what I'm thinking and knows what I'm going to ask for next, like, that's a dream. It's a dream, and you can't find that often. So I'm gonna hang on to Ramel as much as I can.
Yeah, it's wild, the networking that happens, especially in like small filmmaking, like indie filmmaking. You mentioned Farragut. Of like, we both know that we definitely met at like some points around that same period, and probably at that shoot or that con, whichever one. But we don't really remember because we didn't really start working together until The Oath.
Right.
And it's just like funny how like people can kind of like go in and out of each other's lives, and like there is like very much a scene for like fan filmmaking. There are people who just get kind of like involved in that because it's a fun thing to do, and it's like we keep saying, like, being attached to an IP is exciting.
Oh yeah, no, it's a force multiplier. I mean, I made original, films, a couple original shorts for a bit, and you can, go to all that effort and all that work and hope everything goes well. But at the end of the day, you might just stick it on YouTube and 200 people see it or 40 people see it, and we were super lucky with The Oath. Batman put a lot of butts in the seat, obviously, but we just been, I'm stunned every time I look at the view count and see we're creeping up on 1 million views. If you'd asked me a couple years ago if I thought it would be like that, the answer is no.
Yeah. So you've got your cast, you've got your crew, you've got a Batman suit, you've got a location, you've got all this stuff, you've got your rats, and you're ready to go into production. And I feel like here is a good moment for us to take a break. And when we come back, let's actually talk about the hurdles of doing an indie low budget fan film shoot. But before that, let's shout out one of the wonderful shows on our network, and also just remind people that Farragut Forward, I believe, is still crowdfunding at this time, and you should be contributing to that.
I did. Guys, do it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. All right. So again, cast and crew is assembled, location is established, funding is underway, The Oath is ready to go. Let's talk about actually getting into the shoot. How many nights total? What was the worst thing that happened in all of them?
Well, one thing that happened about probably 3 weeks or so before we shot The Oath, there was an accident on the Alec Baldwin film Rust out in the desert. And that happened right before we shot The Oath. And as soon as that happened, and obviously it was a fatal accident, unfortunately. And right as that happened, our production insurance company called me with a lot more questions about what types of firearms we would be using on set. Obviously, we were insured. We were required to have insurance by the city, but we got a pretty lengthy questioning process about firearms, use of firearms, et cetera. And we navigated that. And obviously, it goes without saying, but, safety was always and is always our first concern on any film shoot. Just because we're indie film doesn't mean we can take shortcuts with safety. And I think sometimes indie films, because they don't have the same safety requirements as Hollywood, they feel like they can take some shortcuts, and that's not smart. Mm-hmm. Happy to say, everything we did was super safe, but that was, a last minute thing that obviously no one could have expected. And it worked out. We were able to navigate the insurance and meet the additional requirements they had and show up on set. And at that point, it all came down to the weather, because it was a rain or shine shoot. We had no backup dates. I mentioned before, our actors, not all of them were local. So Oz came all the way up from Georgia. He's based around the Atlanta area. So it was a rain or shine shoot. We were going to shoot in a blizzard if we had to. We were going to shoot in a tropical storm monsoon. We just had to get it in. And we were very lucky. We shot 3 nights, Case, to answer your question. There was more shoots that came later in the coming months, but the actual stuff on location in Petersburg was shot over the course of 3 nights. I think it was a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, or maybe a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And the first night, the skies opened up and we all got really wet. And we got drenched. And that's okay because it was rain or shine. We planned for it. So we got what we needed and banked the footage for the night. Then here's some adversity for you. Our entire film is set in one night, probably over the course of a 20-minute period. Pretty much plays out in real time, the length of the film. Mm-hmm. And right off the bat, I knew we got poured on the first night, and I knew it wasn't going to rain the second and third night. So I've got continuity issues right off the bat, and I can't burn the first night's footage, and then we thought about, well, maybe we do a wet down on the streets, the next 2 nights, which is basically just dumping, buckets of water onto the streets to make it look like it had just recently rained. And that's a piece of adversity that Hollywood could easily overcome, but indie film, we just couldn't. We didn't have the time to just get tons of Home Depot buckets and do a wet down of all the areas we were shooting at to make it look like it had just rained. And actually, I think the alleys we shot at in the second and third night, because Ramel and I did talk about doing it. It wasn't just asphalt. I think it was gravel, which would soak up the water even faster. If it was just asphalt, we could pour it down and get some puddles and stuff like that and probably make it work. But that's a really good example of things that, it would have taken Hollywood 15 minutes to correct that. And we just did not have the time, didn't have the budget, the people to really bridge that gap. But, I don't think anybody other than me notices rain continuity. And we were able to put some rain in post and stuff like that. But yeah,
Does it bug you sometimes?
What's that?
When on occasion when you do rewatch it, does it bug you sometime? Like,
no,
if only I had more buckets.
No, not at all. That's actually a good question because you have to, and this will sound pretentious, right? But I mean, filmmaking is art. That's a thing, right? Which I guess by definition makes me an artist, which sounds pretentious. And I think that's a thing that you just have to, once your finished product is done and you put it out there to the world, you're good with it. You're not going to look back on it and be like, yeah, I mean, I could have done that different, but I don't obsess over it. If the film was good enough for me to be happy with and put out and release to the world, I'm not going to go back and George Lucas it 25 years later when I get more money to dump into it. I'm not going to do that. So yeah, it doesn't bug. Nothing about that movie bugs me too much. I don't think
there won't be the oath reavowed.
special edition.
And Batman is CGI this time.
Oh no! Yeah, right.
It's only his legs, though. You make him taller.
Right?
Taller than Michael Keaton.
But that was the biggest adversity piece, I guess. That night case is just the weather. Yeah. When you're shooting, you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. In the case of our movie, our whole movie is shot outside at night. That's just what the movie is, with the exception of the very last scene. Everything is shot outside at night, and that's just you hope for the best. You plan the best you can. You have all the waterproof gear. You make sure nobody has hypothermia. If they do have hypothermia, you know what to do, and you just kind of march forward. But that was our biggest thing, was keeping people safe and making sure that we always kept people safe.
I was there for the Saturday night shoot. So it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I wasn't off work early enough Friday to come down for that part of it. So I came and stayed, and I ended up staying with John Broughton, who was another producer on this and has been on Another Pass before talking about Star Trek stuff, because Farragut.
Yep.
It's the incestuous relationship of Farragut people. But when I was coming down, it's November. I remember people being like, "Oh yeah, it gets really cold," and I was like, "No, I know what temperature kind of feels like. I'm not that far north of there, and I'll be fine. I'm fat. Everything's fine." And then then I got down there and I was like, "Oh, it gets real cold at night down here. Oh, okay." And I was ultimately fine because, again, fat. I went to college in upstate New York on purpose because I'm able to handle lake effect snow fairly well. But yeah, just on nights where the weather is clear and everything is fine, it was still fucking cold. And that, that is a hard thing to do when you're shooting starting at night and going until technically morning. And when I say technically morning, I don't mean 1 o'clock. I mean 5 a.m. Okay, the sun's about to start coming up. We have to call it now.
Yeah, we had some long nights, and we were probably shooting 8-10 hours, and we didn't start rolling until 6 p.m.
Right.
or something like that. We did rehearsals right as dusk was was coming in, and then it was all night shoots after that. But I'll tell you, you mentioned the weather. That helped Jerry. Jerry Morgan, told me he's playing the role of a beat cop. A beat cop is walking the streets, rain or shine, doesn't matter the weather. And Jerry was the first to tell me, he's like, no, I like this. He's like, this is what my character would go through, And like I mentioned before, Jerry's a big tough Marine, so he's not too scared of rain. And he's like, no, this is actually helping my performance because I'm soaking wet, I'm cold, but that's how Sergeant Kelly's. That's what his life is like. He's out here no matter what. So it actually helped his performance.
On that note, let's talk about fortunate things, because I remember distinctly that at least where we were filming part of it, there was like just a floodlight thing from like a post office or some sort of government building that was like perfect for lighting purposes. Well, at least Ramel and I were discussing, like, at least it's like giving us a lot of light. So what was fortunate about the locations besides the fact that it was just cool alleys? Like, what things did you sort of stumble upon that like worked out well?
Well, definitely. So there's an old, we featured it in the film quite a bit. There's an old Civil War era ironworks right there. So it just had all this Civil War industrial, machinery and these kind of vats looking things. I don't know all the terminology. I don't know what happens in an ironworks, but you just had all this really old rusted metal and crumbling brick. To me, that just looked like that could be a hidden corner in Gotham City, because Gotham City's got a Civil War era ironworks, the remnants of it, but it was basically just an area, like a ruined building area. And I saw it when we scouted it, and I found out it was privately owned. And I got a hold of the owner and said, "Hey, this is who I am. This is what we're doing. Do we have permission to shoot on your property that night?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I don't care what you do, just don't break anything or make it worse." And I said, "No, we won't do that." So we had his permission in writing to show up. We were going to shoot in Petersburg in those alleys no matter what, because we had the space donated to us. But the fact that there was this awesome Civil War ironworks ruins right next to where we were shooting, that was definitely a fortunate thing that we took advantage of. And I'll go back to the weather. It rained on us the first night. The second and third night, we got lucky. There was no rain. There was no snow or blizzard. So we got pretty fortunate, I think, with that. And yeah, Case, to your point, we were shooting in a downtown area. So there were bars, nearby. There were restaurants nearby that could actually cater to our set, or we could send a runner over there to pick up food for folks. So that made life a lot easier because we were so close to an actual kind of catering and food source that, it was easy to have stuff brought over to keep people fresh.
Now, what kind of attention did you get? There is a particular incident that I'm thinking about in terms of attention that was local. But like, I know that like stories are being run about like a Batman movie being shot like around just because it was like kind of cool. But also like maybe a tour happened to like walk right through the shoot.
Yeah, I think I forget how it's been a couple years now, but I forget how I first realized it. But I saw some people gathering across the street from our set. And, I had talked about hanging up some kind of privacy curtains just so it wouldn't necessarily be obvious what we were doing or that we were shooting a movie, because I was very concerned about having people just roll through our set and walk through our set. And then I was concerned with, how our security guys were going to react to that. We're obviously not going to get into a physical altercation with somebody walking through our set. Best you can do is ask them not to do it. And then if they do or not, then, that's kind of up to them. But those things were on my mind, and we were messing with the camera or something. And Guillermo was standing around in his Batman suit, and I start seeing, a few people gather across the street, and I don't pay too much attention to it, but it's on my mind a little. I go about my business. We're in between, takes. We're not shooting anything right now. So I'm messing with the camera or light, and I look up again, and now there's twice as many people, and they're all aiming their cell phones in our direction, taking pictures. Okay, that's fine. We don't have we're not going to run over there and tell them to stop taking pictures or anything. I look up again, and now I see the crowd has tripled, and some of these people are actually stepping off the curb into the street, which is a busy trafficked street, to take pictures and to take selfies. And I'm like, all right, now it's a safety issue, because I don't want us to be the reason somebody gets hit by a car because they're trying to take a selfie with a guy dressed as Batman 80 feet away. So I came on the radio and I said to Ramel, I'm like, we got to get Batman inside, because they're not going to go away until they no longer see Batman. And they walked Guillermo inside base camp, got him out of there. William was just, his ego was through the roof. He knew exactly what was going on. He was Batman, and that whole crowd was there to see him. And I mean, he strutted up that ramp into base camp, and we got him inside, and finally across the street, they eventually, filtered out of there. And I just had always assumed it was word got around in a bar, not too far away, that, hey, they're shooting a movie over here and there's a guy dressed as Batman. And if you say that in a bar, a few people might sneak out to see what's going on. And I mean,
Yeah.
there were probably, I don't know, 50, 75 people over there. And what I later found out, it was actually a ghost tour, like a walking ghost tour of the city of Petersburg. And that was just one of their normal stops, because we were shooting right next to a very famous historic building in Petersburg. And I'm sure there's 1,000 ghost stories about that building. And now I think we're number 1,001, the night Batman came to Petersburg. But it was a ghost tour. And, I think we were pretty distracting to the tour guide, because no one was listening to the tour guide, because they were all taking pictures of Batman. But we waited for him to leave and then got back out. But yeah, again, I was worried about the safety of it, because they were stepping off into that street to take pictures, and I didn't like the vibe of that.
Yeah, I think the only reason William finally agreed to go inside was because that suit is hard to wear. Like, you can't be in it for that long because it is heavy and it is hot.
Yeah, he did pretty well in the cold nights, though. He was the only guy not freezing to death.
That's true. That,
yeah,
just body heat, just hot leather, just like holding your or hot rubber, like just holding your body in.
I think it's 20. I think he said it's 25 or 30 pounds of rubber. I think, with the cape and all that.
So
yeah,
much.
it's a very, and he was in that thing, geez, I don't know, 6-7 hours. And it's not like, again, it's not like we have a stunt double. We don't have a movement double or a stunt double with a secondary bat suit. It's like, no, if you see a guy wearing a bat suit, that's
yeah.
him.
So let's talk about stunts, actually. So there were a couple of them in there, and what was sort of the process in terms of getting that all together? Like, did you have a stunt coordinator from get go, or did you work it out with them? Some of this I like kind of remember from when I was there, but like how did that all kind of come together, and like what were the concessions you made because of just physics?
You know what the toughest concession was again, it's adversity, right? In indie film, none of our actors saw each other until we were getting them into costume, getting ready to shoot. Oz lives in Georgia, Jerry lives in middle Virginia somewhere, and William's here in DC. And we just did not have the time and budget to get everybody together for a weekend, before, to walk through the fight scene and rehearse it and come up with a choreographed fight. So there was just no realistic way to do that. We couldn't bring Oz up for an extra weekend just to work on the fight. So we knew we were going to be winging a lot of that. And I wanted to plan as much as I could. So I did bring on Jason White, who's a really talented martial artist and a really talented actor in his own right. And I asked Jason if he wanted to, help coordinate the fight, but be very limited. He wouldn't be able to be there on set because he had another conflict. But I asked him to work with William in advance to try to get as much of that fight, at least some of the major movements down, just so William can work through it. And then we would really have no other option but the day that we're shooting it to show up early and try to rehearse it with the other two actors there on set. William might disagree with me on that. It wasn't so much the limitations of the suit and physics that kind of made that difficult. It was more of just not being able to pick a centralized time and location to get everybody together in advance, just because of budget and time reasons, and work that fight, fully through. And I've actually learned a lot from that now, how to film a fight scene and how not to film a fight scene. I learned a lot from that, and we're getting ready to apply some of that to our Star Trek Farragut shoot. But that night, yeah, I think when we shot the fight, we split that up over a couple different nights. It all came down to not just the fight, but other stunts that we did. It all came down to William's comfort in the bat suit. I was very aware of what made him comfortable and what made him uncomfortable. There was actually a shot that I wanted to get of him jumping off a ledge, and it was about a 4-foot ledge or so. He'll probably tell you it was closer to 6. I don't think it was that high, but there was a ledge, and I said, I would actually love to get you on this ledge. I can shoot up at you from the street, and I'm going to have you jump off of it. It's a quick cut, right? But we get that quick snippet of Batman actually jumping off what looks like the edge of a roof. And William took a look at it and he said, no, I can't do that in the suit. He was happy to jump off a ledge that was like 3 feet tall, which we did shoot and get in the movie. But he drew the line. on one of those ledges and said, I don't feel comfortable doing it. And, it's not like I fought him on it. He had final say on stunts. It looked easy for me to do in my blue jeans and tennis shoes, but I'm not the guy wearing 30 pounds of rubber. Right. So he had
Right.
final say on all of that. And he did end up doing a couple of jumps off of a different ledge. And he can tell you that story one day. He about, I think, hyperextended his knees on the first one. He was so concentrated on how he was going to land, he didn't exactly bend his knees. So when he hit the ground, it was just like a lightning rod, and it just shot straight up his spine. So he needed a break after that. And then I asked him if he had another one in him, and he got it again. But again, I keep going back to safety and, deferring to the guys who are actually doing that. And, it's indie film. It's not like William is a professionally trained stunt person. William is a friend of mine that owns a bat suit. So I was being realistic about what we could and could not do, and not just with the fight, but with some of the other stunts as well.
So on that note, after the initial 3-night shoot, there's additional stuff. Like, what was shot that you just knew we're going to shoot it this way elsewhere, versus what were the things that were pickups you had to get after starting the editing process?
The first thing we shot after all the exteriors, we got all the exterior stuff done in 3 nights in Petersburg. And about a month later, I went back down to Richmond. Our set was an apartment building in Richmond, and we had access to use the apartment inside. And that's where we shot the last scene of the movie, where Sergeant Kelly sits down at the table, he opens up his mail. All that was shot inside. That was a completely different animal in terms of filming and logistics. It was a super small crew. I think it might have just been myself and Alan Sloniker with Jerry. So you're talking a 2-person crew. There were no time constraints. There was no weather constraints. There was no stress to get it done. We blocked off the whole afternoon to shoot it. And it was the most relaxed, stress-free. That's how it should always be done. Just you have that moment to really get it the way you want it and fine tune the lights and fine tune the camera movements. And if you didn't like it, do it again. And if you didn't like it, do it again, because you have that time. That was just 180 degrees opposite than shooting on the streets at 3:00 in the morning when you're worried about people losing their toes to frostbite. It's just a completely different situation. So we filmed all that in one day in Richmond, that last scene. And then the editing really started in earnest. And the inserts that we shot after that were just simple things like, walking past, it wasn't even Jerry. I think we shot Chris Conkey wearing Jerry's coat, just walking past camera, and you see a wanted poster on the wall kind of flapping in the breeze, or you see a boot splashing into a puddle. And, all that stuff was shot probably 6 months later, just around the house. Actually, I think we shot the puddle maybe out in the driveway, I think, or maybe in the garage.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you do what you got to do. And you don't always know what you need until you get to the edit. And then it's just like the rats. I didn't know I needed rats until we got to the edit. And then you get there and you're like, nope, we've got the salt and pepper. We just need the chipotle and the cumin, and now we got to go find that. And it's worth it. It takes a little bit of extra time and effort to do it, but it's worth it. It opens up the movie a little bit and gives it a little bit of a different feel.
Speaking of feel, I wanted to ask you about the score. How did that all come together?
Yeah, so actually, I found a awesome composer named Francesco De Andrea, who lives in France. And I always edit to temp tracks. I have to edit to music. That's just a me thing. I'm a musician as well in a past life. So music is super, super important to me. I knew I wanted to stick close to that Danny Elfman, score from 1989, Batman 89. And I found an awesome composer online, and I actually licensed some of his tracks to use as temp tracks while I edited. And it happens to me all the time. Now the movie's made, and it's like, what? The temp tracks are what's going to go into the final movie, because I can't picture any other piece of music going in here now, because I like the temp tracks so much. What really sold me on Francesco is what we ended up using for the opening theme of The Oath. It's a track called March of the Giants, and it's our opening credits. I think it's our closing credits. We got a lot of flack for having a 2-minute opening credit sequence on the beginning of a short film. That's just not done in these days. And my retort to that is, we were trying to channel the Batman 89 vibe, which definitely opened up with a really iconic credit sequence. And it was to show off that score, right? It was to show off the music. It was to set the tone and really just kind of get engaged in the movie. And what I learned with The Oath is modern day audiences are not very kind. Like they don't have time to sit around for a 2-minute opening. You can watch on YouTube, people will skip across that opening 2 minutes just to get to the start of the movie. And I think that's kind of sad. As audience members, I think we're losing patience with a lot of really beautiful things. And the score, the reason that opening credit sequence was 2 minutes was just to show off that track because I loved it so much. And Francesco knocked it out of the park. And we had a couple other composers that worked on the film as well, but I'm super, super happy with the music and how it turned out.
Yeah, it was really great. I loved the opening. So, yeah, no, I'm a supporter of your decision to do that.
Thank you. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. It didn't change me at all.
No, I'm glad you did.
Yeah. The score, it works so well in feeling like just side pieces, like you said, from looking at the same movie but from a mile downriver. Like it feels like music that is just it's the ones that would have played for those scenes if this was scenes earlier in the movie.
Yeah. No, we tried. It all ties back to really, and we can talk about it just a little bit. It all ties back to really trying to capture that Batman 89 vibe. And that even goes for camera movements, by the way. I was actually very specific. I didn't want to use any camera movements that Tim Burton didn't use in Batman 89. The fight scenes in Batman 89 weren't shot like the Bourne Identity, which most fight scenes you would shoot these days, you're going to get right in there, you're going to go handheld. That's just what modern audiences would do. That's the accepted way to shoot a fight scene now. And you go back and look at Batman 89, a lot of static shots, a lot of wide shots. And so even trying to stick close to that Batman 89 vibe, I mean, I even tried to mimic that with the camera movements as much as I could with an indie film budget.
Did you end up having any Dutch angles in there? I can't remember now that I'm looking at it.
I'm not a fan of Dutch angles. That's like asking me to turn my desk, at a 20-degree angle. No, I'm too OCD for that. There has to be a really, really good reason for me to use a Dutch angle. And there was nothing going on in the oath that called for a Dutch angle.
No nod to Batman 66.
No, as few as possible.
Yeah, so you assemble this movie, you get a wonderful score, you get the matte painting that looks so goddamn cool. It's shot so well. Like behind the scenes photos that I took that I posted on social media were my highest engagement Instagram post for years when I posted those, because it was just that looks really fucking cool. But so you put this movie together and then you put it out there. Do you want to talk about the process of deciding how you're going to distribute it? You did it opening night, which I attended, which was awesome. What went into that? Just talk about how you got it out there.
Yeah, of course. I always knew it was going to go to YouTube. I mean, there's really no other way to put out a nonprofit fan film if you want people to see it. It's got to go to YouTube, and you can't monetize it, obviously, which we never did.
Just got to emphasize that. Just got to keep saying that part.
Oh yeah, please, Warner Brothers, please listen to this podcast. Yeah. I guess what's the best way to say it? I did my research to find out if we were going to get shut down or not, because that's the thing that happens, right? Depending on the IP owner, whether it's Warner Brothers or Paramount or whoever owns some of these IPs, when you're doing a fan film, the last thing I wanted was to put 2 years of my life and 2 years of other people's lives into a project that's going to live on the internet for 2 minutes and then get shut down because perceived copyright infringement. So my first thing before we ever even made the movie was, hey, is this going to get shut down? So I did my research to make sure we were safe to put this out on YouTube, and I was comfortable to do that. So yeah, it launched on YouTube. You mentioned it a couple nights before the premiere. We did have an opening night for our cast and crew and families at Alamo Drafthouse here in the DC area. And we got to see it on the big screen. And that was really surreal for me. Actually, I had to go down about 3 or 4 days early for a sound check and an AV check just to sit in the theater. And it was a really surreal moment. Maybe other indie filmmakers can relate to this because they would have had to do the same thing. But you're sitting in an empty theater by yourself watching your film from start to finish, which was on a big screen, which was I didn't expect to be kind of moved by that or affected by that. But I'm sitting there and it sounds great. That score that I just mentioned from Francesco, that coming through the theater speakers. And then it looked good. The film looked good. I was terrified it was going to, have a weird cropping ratio and chop somebody's head off or something, but everything looked great and it sounded good. And we had the premiere night a few nights later and had a red carpet and had a great turnout. I think we ended up, quote unquote, selling it out. We didn't charge tickets for it, but I think we sold out 2 theaters. I think the first one wasn't big enough to hold us, so we had to move to a second one, and then we sold that one out too, I think. So, I mean, it was just a great night to, get that group of people together. Oz came back up from Georgia. Some of the other actors and crew came in from different places in the country. So, I mean, it was actually just a really fun reunion because you got to remember by the time that movie came out, it was over a year since we shot it. Some people think with indie films, I guess you can shoot this stuff in a weekend and get it out the next Tuesday. But ultimately, from start to finish, this was like 2 years of my life. And from shooting that movie until the night we had our red carpet, that was a full year, just over a year. So it was a reunion for us. It was a great night. I remember I didn't eat dinner at all because I was just too busy bouncing back and forth. I wanted to have a bunch of drinks that night. I think I only had one drink. So it was just those are the things I remember about that night. We did a Q&A, afterward, and got the cast up on stage and did a Q&A with the crowd, which was really fun because I get tired of hearing myself talk. So get to hear the actors talk about their process and their experience. It was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, it was a great night. I had such a fun time, like coming out and seeing everyone again. Like you mentioned, all the people who were like from out of town being there was just like such a fun part of that. Michael Stumbo and I like connected for real for the first time, which was like great because he's a giant Superman nerd and I'm trying to get him on Men of Steel because Superman nerd, like we got to stick together. Yeah, like that was fantastic. And then it came out. And have you dealt with any sort of like feedback or copyright issues or anything? Like, has anything come up ever with this?
No, not at all. And I think it's just because we were always super transparent about what we were doing. And by the way, there's also we're not the only Batman fan film out there. There's plenty, and there's plenty who've crowdfunded, much more than we raised. So no, we never had any issues. But maybe it's in my spam folder and I've just not checked it yet. But not that I've seen. No, we've never had any issues whatsoever. And the reception was awesome. I don't remember any of the numbers now, but the first night that it opened on YouTube, I was watching the views in real time, and it was just the number was going up and up and up and up and up, and it was awesome, And then I went to sleep and woke up the next day, and it was 10 times more, And then I went to sleep and woke up the next day, and it was 10 times more, and that's pretty exciting. As a filmmaker, you want your stuff to be seen by the widest audience possible, and The Oath was definitely our most watched product, and it got a lot of extra eyeballs on our actors, which was, like I mentioned before, a big hope of mine.
Yeah, I want to go into like some of those extra eyeballs. Like, what was some of the coverage that you got? For me, like this project was, I don't want to say legitimized, but it was like it was interesting when I had friends who started hearing about it from other sources that they followed, then being like, oh, wait, fuck, that was the one that you were talking about on Facebook, and like kind of turning around. Like, what were like some of like the surprise interviews that you did related to it? Like, how did some of that like coverage like really come about? Like, were people reaching out to you or were you reaching out to them? Like, talk about that.
Yeah, the first big one was CBR. Comic Book Resources picked this up, and their headline, which I still want to frame. I want to frame it in my office here. The headline of the CBR article was "Studio Quality Batman Fan Film." That's one thing if like my mom called my movie studio quality, but like CBR, they've seen some comic book movies in their time, and it's like, you know what? That was a huge, huge boost for us, and they linked to it, and that drove a lot of traffic our way, which was awesome. Your question about did we reach out or did they reach to us? Both. We definitely got hit with a lot of requests for interviews and podcasts and stuff like that through the website, through YouTube as well, and even Facebook. And then we also had our own little press kit that we would put out to some of the usual suspects to see if they wanted to pick up and talk about the movie. So it worked both ways. You kind of have to be, and other indie filmmakers will relate to this, you have to kind of be your biggest fan, your own biggest fan, and your own employee number one, and really help push out a lot of that stuff, because it's not enough just to spend 2 years making the movie. It's like, now you really have to promote it. You have to market it. You have to get it in front of people. And I mean, there's a lot of people that get paid a lot of money to market stuff. And it's, that's the unsung battle right there. It just seemed to be nonstop for a long time.
So outside of CBR, what would you say was the interview that you were the most excited about?
Oh man, that's a hard one to answer. I mean, we did a lot, Went on my buddy Kevin Reitzel's show. He does the Fandom Podcast Network. I think he had us on a couple different times. Those are great, super great interviews. Oh, there's just been so many. I was interviewed by a guy who was actually doing his thesis on fan films, and he wanted to, interview somebody close to the fan film world. And that was a really interesting one, just to hear his take on that stuff. No, it's hard to pick. That's a really tough question because there's no way I could pick just one. We did a whole chain of those, and they were all awesome.
So shifting gears again, I see there's like all this like behind the scenes material that you have like linked to in the actual show notes for The Oath. What really drove you to like make that kind of material? Was that marketing material you were creating beforehand? Was that just like a dedication to continuing to sort of like build out the material available to everyone?
Well, for me, I'm a huge nerd of behind the scenes movie stuff. You know, you remember the old show Movie Magic that used to air back in the day. You know, I think it was on Discovery, and all the making of books, all my favorite movies like Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Batman. I'm just a huge nerd for how movies are made and the behind the scenes aspects of stuff like that. It just interests me. So yeah, on all my shoots and even today, like all the films, even Farragut, I'm always asking cast crew, hey, when you got a few seconds, video some stuff, just get some extra footage back there if you have time, because at the end, I would love to edit all this stuff together and have a behind the scenes kind of catalog. And so that's like the official answer. I just love it. I love behind the scenes. I love seeing how the sausage is made. And you never know, it might help somebody else. Somebody might look at what we're doing and say, oh, wow, you just gave me an idea of how I can make my thing better. Right. So there might be a kind of an educational piece to that too. And then the other answer is, yeah, there's some marketing strategy there too, because if you have a YouTube channel like we do, but you only put a movie out every 2 or 3 years, I mean, that YouTube algorithm is a bitch, man. Like you, you need some content. You gotta feed the beast the content, and making a movie every 2 years and putting one video on your YouTube channel every 2 or 3 years is not really how that platform works optimally, right? It behooves you to have a constant stream. And I hate the word content. I hate that word, because to me, it just means like soulless crap that you have to put out, right? But if you have a kind of a library of stuff that you can trickle out every month or so on a YouTube channel, that's going to, again, drive the algorithm, help more eyeballs find you and find your work and that type of stuff. So it's kind of a both. It's a mixture of being a nerd who loves how movies are made, and then also kind of knowing a little bit about how YouTube works and needing the need to have a constant stream of stuff to put out to people.
I think that is a masterful explanation and just like understanding of like how to approach this all. I think that anyone who's out there who is looking to do their own kind of fan film should really look at the type of material you're putting out there, because The Oath has done really well. Like I think it's just a really cool project in general, and I've felt that since the first time I heard about it. So I'm so glad to chat with you about this. Like I know we've talked like off mic about this all the time, but I'm just really glad to get you on and talk about
Yeah,
it.
thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you guys having me. I always like
Yeah.
talking about this stuff, and hopefully, it might help somebody else out there that has an idea to make a story.
Yeah. And I think also for our listeners, it's good because we talk a lot about, and we have the joy of hindsight, right, on this podcast where we do another pass at other people's movies. But it's a good reminder. Just remind everyone, making movies it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's work.
But it's getting easier. I want to say that, like, if I can add that on, like, I think we're living in a golden age of indie film. I think the barrier for entry has never been this low. The camera that I shot The Oath on a couple years ago is a camera that Steven Spielberg would have loved to have had his hands on about 40 years ago. And, that's not an incredibly expensive camera. And it makes me happy that it's now easier and easier to make a film and get voices that should be heard actually heard. And you end up having a platform like YouTube, which is your own distribution company that you can, put your stuff out there to the world and actually find an audience. And I think part of what slowed me down for many, many years is I kept getting in my own way, making excuses for, here's 100 reasons why I should not try to be a filmmaker. And then one day I got tired of making excuses, and I'm like, you idiot. Like, you have the equipment, you have the resources, go out and make something. And then if it doesn't suck, put it on YouTube and a million people might watch it. And yeah, it's cost you some time, but it's never been so easy to actually do that. And it'll never be easy to do it, but it's never been this easy, right? I mean, the stuff that indie filmmakers are doing now, people couldn't even have conceived of 15 years ago. It's interesting to me to look forward and see how Hollywood is going to react over the next 10 to 15 years as professional equipment becomes cheaper. More persons are interested in leaving Hollywood to get into the indie film world for reasons of their own. Like, it's just a really interesting space to kind of watch over the next couple of years. And I think we really are in like a golden age of indie film. It's a cool time to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that these fan films can exist at all is proof of that, because we're talking about emulating movies that cost millions upon millions of dollars to make, and competently getting the look right, competently getting special effects right. Animation is so easy now in a way that it just wasn't before. The fact that we have animated components of like this network in animation that would have been mind-blowing in 1950. Like we're really seeing like a cool era in filmmaking, and I think The Oath is a great example of that. Like, you made a piece that looks like just a deleted scene from the 1989 Batman movie, and you don't have the entire budget of Warner Brothers behind you, so you don't have a Diet Coke ad campaign running concurrently. So everyone who is listening to this podcast and is this far in and hasn't seen The Oath, they should absolutely go on YouTube and look up The Oath. Award-winning Batman fan film, Chaotica Studios. Like, you should check that all out. And then you should also tune in to Farragut Forward, because that's another thing we're going to want to plug. But Johnny, do you have anything else you want to plug? Where can people find you and follow you? Like, give all your info.
Of course, yeah. So my company is Chaotica Studios, Kaotica, and you can check us out at chaoticastudios.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and definitely YouTube. You can catch me personally. Best place to get me is on Twitter. I refuse to say X. I don't think anybody actually says X these days,
No,
right?
always
So
does.
a joke.
I'm refusing.
No one says it sincerely.
I'm refusing to say X, but yeah, the best place to catch me direct is on Twitter. Or yeah, drop us a note on any of the Chaotica Studios channels. We'd love to hear your feedback, and like and subscribe and help us defeat our algorithm overlords.
Awesome. Sam, where can people find you and follow you?
They can find me here whenever an episode drops, and occasionally on our Discord when I remember it exists. And then other than that, I'm busy watching The Oath for the third time, maybe the fourth time and the fifth time. So if you have any complaints about anything I said, or you're really confused why I was obsessed with rats, you can find Case at.
Well, you can find me on all the platforms at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on to my AIM screen name for dear life, which is Quetzalcoatl5. You can find me on all of those. You can find me on the Discord, which you can find a link to at certainpov.com, or I believe it's in my bio on the various platforms. If not, just go to certainpov.com and you'll find a link to our Discord. You'll also find a ton of great shows. There's so many cool productions going on. I don't know, fuck it. I'm going to promote Saturday Morning Confidential, which Johnny has been on, being interviewed about The Oath back closer to its actual release. So, yeah, Maddie Limerick, great coverage about things that people feel nostalgia for. And Maddie, great. Check out Maddie. That's a good one to check out.
Maddie.
Also, again, Farragut Forward still crowdfunding as of this time, which is February 6th when we're recording this one. So you can still put money down on making a real recreation of the 1980s film Star Trek's a reality. It looks so good. What we have shot looks amazing. We have amazing people behind it. We have people giving the performances of their lives for this thing. We are doing just incredible work on that. And I can't stop raving about it enough, because it was just so goddamn cool to be a part of it, and to still be a part of it. So, be on the lookout for that as well. And then tune back in for we're going to have an awesome show next time. Sam, what do we have up on the docket for next time?
Well, next time we'll be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Elisea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Jeff Moonen. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
Case was reacting because I was giving him a dirty look when he was talking about the that light. If I had my way, Case, I would have gotten a 308 rifle and taken that light out, but I didn't do that. I was not a fan of that light. I went off on a tangent. What was your question?
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.